All right, well, we are about a minute past the hour, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks for all of you who joined early and heard some of our backroom chatter, and welcome to those of you who are just getting on. We are very excited to be kicking off our first in the series of social and emotional learning exchange webinars. This series is going to feature presenters from the first SEL Exchange event that was held in October, and will also serve as a preview of the next SEL Exchange that will be held in October 2020. And we'll be hearing more about this in just a moment, but before we get to that, I'll review just a few quick housekeeping items with you. We will be accepting questions throughout the webinar, and we'll hold a Q&A session at the end. So to ask a question, again, anytime throughout the webinar, you can type your question into the chat box that's in your control panel, and I'll put it into the queue to be answered during the Q&A period. If you have any technical difficulties during the webinar, which we certainly hope you don't, but if you do, you can use that same chat feature to get my attention, and I'll do my best to resolve the problem for you. Usually the most common problem is a delay either in the audio or sometimes in the advancing of the slides, and this is usually due to a weak or fluctuating internet connection. If audio is an issue for you, I suggest that you disconnect the audio from your computer and dial in using the phone number that's on your control panel. You can keep the GoToWebinar panel up to see the slide deck online, but connecting sometimes by phone to the audio can help with the clarity of that. We will be sending you a recording of the presentation, so if you need to drop off early or you do have technical problems, keep an eye on your email inbox tomorrow, and we'll be sharing the link to the recording as well as the presentation slides with you. All right, so I think that's it for our housekeeping. So we're going to get started. I'm excited to introduce Kitty Rothschild, who is Chief Operating Officer at Castle, and she's going to share a little bit more about the new Social and Emotional Learning Exchange webinar series and the 2020 in-person live event. Kitty? Oh, have we got Kitty on audio? Well, not sure we're getting her. Mark, you're not hearing her, are you?
No.
All right. We'll give it just a few more minutes to see if she can troubleshoot. And does not look like I have her muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, but we have an echo.
How about now? Is that better?
Yep. Yes, okay. Very clear.
I think we were muted on, Emily, I think that we were muted. You had our phone muted, but hello.
Oh, okay.
Welcome, everybody. Good morning. Sorry about that little technical bobble. So excited to be here with everyone to introduce this new webinar series. I'm Kitty Rothschild. I'm Castle's COO, and I also serve as the Executive Director of the SEL Exchange Conference. I know we're all here to hear and learn from Marc Brackett, whose session at our last October SEL Exchange was standing room only. And so we will move quickly through this introduction to the webinar series, but we'd like to take just a minute to share some information with all of you about our SEL Exchange Conference. Next slide, Emily. Castle hosted the inaugural conference on social and emotional learning this past October in Chicago, with support from our champion sponsor, the Allstate Foundation. It was the largest SEL conference to date, with 1,500 attendees from 48 states and 30 countries. Our attendees included policymakers, district and school leaders, program providers, teachers, researchers, and students from around the country and the world, and it'll serve as a platform going forward for further understanding of SEL for anyone who's interested, whether you're new to the work or if you've been in the space for many years. Castle hosted more than 400 presenters, leading experts on key SEL topics like building culture of equity through SEL, SEL as a global movement, civil society and citizenship, the future of work, SEL assessment, and communicating about SEL, to name a few. We can move on to the next slide. Feedback from the conference has been overwhelmingly positive, and we're thrilled about that. So we're going to do it again. And using the feedback that we received next year, we're going to make a few continuous improvement changes. Of note, the majority of attendees left with new knowledge and perspective on SEL and found the content valuable for future efforts. And 94% of attendees plan to join us again in the 2020 exchange. Next slide. In fact, planning's underway for the 2020 SEL Exchange. We are up to our elbows, and it'll be next October in the Chicagoland area. Here's some key dates you'll want to note, and you can head to our website to sign up for more information. As Emily said at the top, we'll be sending you these slides, so you'll be able to find them in your deck. We're so excited about this webinar series, which will continue and highlight our highly attended sessions from 2019, beginning with Marc Brackett, From Theory to Practice to Systemic Change. Marc, it's all yours.
All right, thank you.
All right, and Marc, I will make you presenter, so we'll see your slides here in just a second.
Wonderful. Can you see the full deck now?
We sure can.
Okay, great. So let me do a little video hello to everybody. Hi, everyone. Good to see you. I'm just going to jump right in. So welcome to this webinar. I'm super excited to launch this series with everyone. And I'm going to just ask everyone to get settled in their seat, wherever you are today, if you're at work, if you're on the subway, if you're in your car, hopefully not, at home. Maybe just take a nice long inhale and an exhale just to bring yourself right into this moment. Okay, so I decided to basically take the presentation that I did at the SEL Exchange, condense it, and also add a little bit to it based on some of my more recent thinking. And so the title is Social Emotional Learning from Theory to Practice to Systemic Change. I'm going to shut my video just to make sure everybody has good bandwidth for the presentation. And I'll show my face again later. Before I begin, let me just give those of you who don't know me a little bit of background. My day job is I am a professor at Yale University in the Child Study Center. And my other day job is I am the director of the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. And we are a team of 60 people who are scientists and practitioners who essentially run around the world trying to get people to talk about their feelings and study those things. And many of you know that I have spent the last 20 or so years of my life working on one approach to social and emotional learning called Ruler that is now in about 3,000 schools across the United States and in other countries. And what I really want to share with you today are some lessons that I've learned in doing that work. From the beginning days when I was working with my good old uncle and building a curriculum to the work that we're doing, for example, in New York City public schools or Seattle public schools in large systemic change. Lastly, before I jump in, please just all the information below from social media to my contact information. Okay, so we're going to jump right in and we're going to make this interactive as much as possible. And with that said, for those of you who know me, I can't do anything without asking people how they're feeling. So it is, for me, 11:10 a.m. Eastern time. And some of you are obviously in different places. How are you feeling? When you take a look at our mood meter, for those of you who are unfamiliar with it, essentially what I'm going to ask you to think about right now is your level of pleasantness. So what are you thinking about? Are you thinking, yay, I get to attend a webinar with some guy from Connecticut and talk about my feelings? Or are you thinking to yourself, I've been forced to do this. I don't really want to be here. The last thing I want to do is talk about my feelings. So that would be unpleasant versus pleasant. So just give yourself your number from -5 meaning highly unpleasant to +5 being highly pleasant. On the y-axis it says the word energy. So literally check in with your brain and your body, which are connected, by the way, and ask yourself, do you feel physically activated? Do you feel energized? Are you depleted? So what's your body telling you? All right. And now you get to go from all that to your quadrants. Yellow, red, blue, or green. Yellow, high energy and pleasant. Green, pleasant but low in energy. Red, high energy, also unpleasant. Blue, low energy, unpleasant. So we're going to do a little poll now. If you want to just bring that up for me. And we're going to just see where our participants are. So everyone, are you in the yellow, red, blue, or green? Please take the next few seconds and plot yourself.
We'll give you about 10 more seconds. We've got lots of people answering.
So it looks like we've got a large percentage of our participants here in the yellow, and 43%, in green, 36%. So almost 80% of our participants are saying that they're feeling pleasant and high and low in energy. So I'm going to take that as a compliment, although I haven't even done anything yet. And only about 20% of us are in the red or blue. So what I want to do now for the next 1 minute is I want everyone to just convert their color to a word. And if you can help me out here, what I want to do is have people write their words in, and we're going to just take a quick look at what the vocabulary words are that people are using. Does everyone know how to do that?
Yep, it looks like we're getting some responses. Folks on your control panel, there should be a chat box, chat or questions, and you can just type your answers right in there. Yep, we're getting a couple more in.
Okay, for some reason I can't see them.
Are you not seeing those? Okay, I'll start reading some out. So serene was our first one that came in. We've got fatigued. We have quite a few thankfuls, quite a few contented, a sleepy, energized, more contented, meh, I like that one, calm, alert, pleasant, busy, mixed feelings, upbeat, curious, goofy, sunny, mellow.
All right.
Yeah. Wide range out there.
It sounds like it. Well, thank you for sharing, everybody. And now I'm going to ask you to set your intention. So we're here for just under an hour. And if you're feeling upbeat and yellow, what's your strategy for maybe staying up there or maybe not being so yellow that you're distracted by all of your excitement? If you're calm, what might you do to kind of boost your energy? And if you are meh or feeling unpleasant, what do you need right now? Knowing that this is a webinar and it's hard for me to support you individually differently, I'll be different than as if I were your teacher in the classroom or your principal. And I'm just going to ask all of you to think about the strategy that will best serve you for the next hour or so to get the most out of the webinar. And before we jump into it, I'm going to ask people to just share some strategies. Go back into your chat box and, what strategies do you think are going to help get the most out of the webinar? And if you wouldn't mind sharing those out as they type them in, that would be great.
Sure. Need to be present. Take a moment with my higher power, not to multitask. That's one I need to take to heart. Staying focused, being present and open-minded, being mindful. Lots of focusing on the moment, staying grounded, not getting too caught up in my head, drinking my chai tea, being present and not distracted by phone and email, deep breaths to slow myself down, more don't allowing myself to be distracted, taking notes, making a cup of coffee in contrast to the chai tea, listening to others and being present.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. So I want to just call out, these strategies. And obviously, for many of you, saying that you're going to focus, it might be easy. I know that for me, focusing is actually quite difficult. I have huge attention problems. Um, the Somebody told me recently the only time that you're focused, Mark, is when you're in charge, which was an interesting comment. Um, and I took it to heart actually, meaning, am I really present, when I'm with people? And I think it's something to think about in terms of, when we say we're going to focus, what are we doing psychologically? What are we doing physically to help us focus? And when we're teachers and our principals in our schools, can we just tell kids to focus? What do they have to be able to do to focus? And lastly, what I want to say before we jump in is that I think telling people to focus is actually slightly overrated. And the reason for that is that emotions in our classrooms are mostly co-regulated. Think about it, right? If I were to do this webinar talking like this, and good afternoon, everybody, I'm so excited to be here. My name is Marc Brackett. All of a sudden, right, you would hit the leave button and you'd be out of here. Unfortunately for our nation's youth, they can't just say like, I'm out of here, when they're in a classroom where there's not a lot of engagement. Or for teachers, right? It's hard to just be like, I'm out of here. Although unfortunately we do have a serious burnout rate. But point being is that in our classrooms, in our schools, in our homes, even in our workplaces, I think we fail to recognize that emotions are mostly co-regulated, especially by the leaders and teachers that are running, the classrooms and the schools. So with that, I'm going to move on. And we're going to jump to another poll because I really want us to, before we get started, really dive deeply into this idea of systemic change or comprehensive SEL. And so without sharing the perspective that I have around this, I wanted to do a poll to just see, for the attendees that are online today, where are you? So can we put up that poll, please?
Yep. Launching it now.
So my question to all of you is, how comprehensive is the SEL programming in your school or district? This is without my definition.
We'll give you about 10 more seconds.
Oh, there's a little typo there. It should be not very, a little, somewhat, then just comprehensive, and then very, but it's good enough.
I apologize.
We'll just combine those two. It's good enough.
Okay, I apologize about that, Mark. Typing too fast this morning. All right, I'm going to close the poll and we'll share the results.
Okay. So looks like got some distribution here, but only 13% are above what we'd say the median or the middle, which is interesting to think about. And let's just hold those numbers in our heads, and then we're going to come back to this question a little bit later in the poll. What I wanted to do is give you a brief history. For those of you who are unfamiliar with the history of social and emotional learning, what I wanted to share with you was that in 1990, the first article on emotional intelligence was written. It was written by my mentors, Peter Salovey and Jack Mayer, and they were professors, our professors. Peter is now the president of my university, Yale, and Jack is a professor at the University of New Hampshire. Interestingly enough, they had a lot of difficulty publishing that article because the field of psychology wasn't ready for a concept called emotional intelligence. We'll get more into that in a moment. 1995 or 94, 95 era, the book Emotional Intelligence by Daniel Goleman was written and released, became one of the best-selling books ever written. Side note, I'm actually having lunch with Dan today. Also in that year, around the same time, the Collaborative for Academic Social and Emotional Learning was created. And if you were at the Exchange last year, you got to see the founders of CASEL, and I'm a proud board member of CASEL and the co-chair of next year's conference. I'm very excited to be having a stronger role next year. And many of you know Roger and Karen, who the former and the current president of CASEL. 1999, the field of positive psychology has moved, or launched, I should say. This is the work of Martin Seligman and other people like Ed Diener and Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who are really saying that we need to have a model of psychology that is focusing on strengths as opposed to, thinking about what's wrong. 2000, there's assessments and interventions and coaching programs. And 2018, the Aspen Institute has the National Commission and releases a report. And up until today, surveys are showing that everybody's saying that SEL is important and many are implementing programs. So my question then, given all this history, so 25 years of SEL and 30 years of the ideas of emotional intelligence, why is it then that 18% of the population is affected by anxiety disorders? Why is it 25% of children between 13 and 18 having an anxiety disorder? Why is it? This is, I think, a staggering statistic. Around 60% of undergraduates in our nation's colleges and universities are reporting overwhelming anxiety. Not 6%, 60%. Why is it that 40% of college students report feeling so depressed they had difficulty functioning? Depression is now the leading cause of disability worldwide. Why is it that there's been a 28% increase in the United States in terms of suicide rates? Why is it that every year there's been about a 20% increase in students seeking treatment for mental health? Why is it that bullying has not subsided? I was a kid who sadly was horrifically bullied in school. There's been bullying programs and all this work, but yet if you look at the data, truthfully, I wrote a paper on this year with a colleague, it's flatlined. And in many instances in the last 3 years, for reasons I won't go into today, bullying has increased in many instances, about a 35% increase in cyberbullying. In terms of hate crimes, there's been a 100% increase per year for the last 3 years in regard to anti-Semitic hate crimes and others. Why is it that we have still a disproportionate number of children of color being expelled from school? And why is it that disengagement is so high among our students? In Connecticut alone, we have 40,000 disengaged high school students, chronically disengaged. Why is it that 50 to 60% of employees are disengaged at work? 13% say they're miserable. And 40 to 50% of doctors, nurses, and teachers report excessive burnout. So everybody thought they were coming to hear a webinar that was going to be optimistic. I will get there, I promise. But I want you to think about that for a minute. I want you to really put on your thinking caps now. So we're all taking social and emotional learning seriously. We all care about it. I mean, the exchange was phenomenal. People are adopting these approaches and programs, but yet there's something missing. I'm curious to know, or I'm curious to hear, what's on your mind? Why do you think that we haven't, or why do you think that the data don't look so great for our nation's youth? And if I could get my colleague to share what people write, that would be greatly appreciated.
I sure will. Let's see what people come up with. Superficial implementation of programs. Youth voice is missing from SEL strategies. Social media, fear of vulnerability. Professionals are not practicing SEL themselves because SEL is confined to just the classroom. There's a lack of training for administrators and teachers. It's possibly too great a focus on students and not enough on the grown-ups who serve them. Because of politics within education, lots of variations on adults not modeling the skills, not having the skills themselves.
Okay, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
So I think many of you hit the nail on the head. One is this prevailing misunderstanding that emotions are weak. right? In psychology, people would often say emotions are noise, which means they're the error in research. People think it's all about being nice and singing kumbaya, holding hands. Had one CEO of a company say, you think I'm going to sit around and hold my colleagues' hands during a business meeting? Or this belief that we have to rule our feelings, that it's about like controlling our, idiosyncratic impulses that drive us to the dark side. I had one father recently in a talk I've given say to me, God, Mark, you're so vulnerable. I just don't know. Like, you share all about your childhood and your fears and your anxiety. And he goes, and your bullying. And he said, well, I would never, ever let my son know that I was bullied like you were, because then my son would think I was weak. So I said to this father, well, what if your son is being bullied? And he sees, that resistance or that, wall between you and him. How do you feel about that? So I think we have to move away from this prevailing misunderstanding that our emotions are weak, and I'm going to make a strong claim that actually emotions and emotion skills and social emotional learning actually needs to have greater time in our education system, as many of you would believe as well. We also have to acknowledge the influence of technology, that the average teenager spends about 6 hours per day using technology. That we know that anxiety and depression are correlated with the time spent using technology, and that now more than ever, the first time teenagers prefer to communicate via text than being face-to-face. A recent study showed that children, or infants I should say, who are below 1 year of age are actually spending on average about an hour a day on technology. We have to acknowledge a change in parenting styles. I don't know about any of you, but when I was a student I'm 50, when I was a college student, my mother wasn't texting me in the middle of the exam asking me, how I was doing on my exam, and wasn't calling me before and after the exam. And as a professor, I see unbelievable, what I would say, an unbelievable lack of individuation among many of our students. I think another piece of it is this mixed message that I want my child to be successful and happy, but they got to get into a college. And so this mixed messaging really messes with kids' brains. I think the same mixed messaging happens in our high schools, which I work in a lot, as they say things like, we want our kids to be healthy and happy, but we also want our numbers in terms of the kids to get into the good schools. People said politics, right? We have poor role models for healthy emotion management. We've got emotional intelligence should only be taught at home, people saying this. We've got resistance to the changing design of education. Also, I think people have noticed that, oftentimes schools, are accustomed to the kit model. Let's just buy a kit and call it a day. Friday Feelings Day. Same thing in workplaces, right? They're accustomed to putting emotional intelligence into human resources as opposed to from the C-suite. And then finally, many of us said something that I think resonates, which is that the adults who are raising, or it should be who are raising and teaching kids and leading organizations have not had adequate education in these skills. So these, and I think the youth voice piece is a really important piece that someone added. I think also what I heard is this lack of training and teacher preparation and leader preparation, again, leading to, why we haven't had the desired impact. So let's jump into, what is the state of emotional affairs of our nations and our adults' lives right now? And here's what we know from research that I've done over the last couple of years with my colleagues. The first is that our nation's high schoolers are mostly tired, bored, and stressed. 77% of the words they use to describe their emotional lives are mostly, unfortunately, negative words. Our college students are feeling stressed and anxious and overwhelmed. Interestingly enough, is that they say they feel that way. As someone who is an emotion researcher, I wasn't a believer of that word. I think that's what I call a clumping word, that everybody just is stressed. And I want to know how are they really feeling. So I did qualitative research with my students and found that actually they feel envious, meaning that they're sitting around making endless social comparisons. This one's, has more money than I have. This one's got father who's more connected. This one's mother is more famous, and everyone else is going to have greater opportunity than I'm going to have. And what I also found is that it's a very high correlate of psychological loneliness, which we also know is a crisis right now in our nation. My students say they even feel lonely when they're in the presence of others. Think about that. So it's a psychological loneliness, not even a physical loneliness that is occurring right now. I'm going to get into why this is an interesting finding when it comes to how we help support children, because I think these like one-shot interventions, whether it be a mindfulness intervention, which, by the way, I don't think are bad. I practice mindfulness, or a yoga intervention, which fine. I like to do yoga. But the truth is, none of these one-shot interventions are going to reduce envy. I mean, there's no data to support that downward dog reduces college students' envy. Unfortunately, that's the case. And I think what happens even at the college level is that they just get overwhelmed with the mental health problems, and they just think that, let's just throw meditation, let's just throw yoga at these students without really helping them to develop the skills that they need to navigate their lives or change the culture and climate. Same thing related to high schools, middle and elementary schools. Educators, we found, are frustrated, overwhelmed. And what we found in our study also was that teachers who were in unhealthy school climates had the most negative emotions, and they also had the most physical and mental health challenges, from stress-related absences to greater anxiety and depression, to greater burnout, to even higher body mass indexes. Does this resonate with people? Think about that. The culture and climate of our workplaces and even our homes and our schools leads to greater negative emotions, which leads to greater physical and mental health problems. So then we decided, all right, enough with schools. I got to get out of here. I can't take it anymore. Everybody's so unpleasant and stressed. And then we went to the workplace. We got a grant and we studied 15,000 people, from farmers to people who work in finance to people who work in filmmaking. And guess what? They're stressed too. So when we go back to our mood meter, it looks like something's very interesting. 80% of the people on this webinar are saying they feel pleasant. I think that was the data. 80% say they were in the yellow and the green. But unfortunately, the data from the real world show that 80% of the people are feeling red and blue, not yellow and green. So maybe we just need to learn from all of you on how to be healthier and happier. Or maybe you're just lying because you don't want to tell the truth about how you're really feeling. Or maybe you're just super special people. I'm not sure. I think the challenge with all of this is that people, when we ask them how they want to feel, just say happy. And when you really think about that, it's a little bit limiting. Firstly, happiness is in a large way genetic, meaning that our kind of baseline level of core happiness can vary, obviously, through our circumstances. But it is a pretty genetic factor, about 60 to 70% genetic, which means there is 30 to 40%, that can be moved around a bit. But also, is it realistic to be happy all the time? If I were to interview all of my colleagues at Castle and all of my friends and schools, right, is it realistic to not ever be in the red and blue and just be yellow and green all the time? I don't think so. I mean, certainly on my path to becoming a professor, I've been, frustrated, I've been overwhelmed, I've been made to feel bad about myself, I've been depressed, I've been overwhelmed. The list goes on, as is life. Life is replete with many negative emotions, and we have to acknowledge their importance as well. As a matter of fact, I'm chronically angry at our nation's education system for not taking social and emotional learning seriously, and in many ways, that motivates me. So some people say anger is a destructive emotion. Well, it's only destructive when you don't use it wisely. When you have healthy strategies to manage your anger and channel it into being a change agent, like I hope many of you will be in your schools for social and emotional learning, right? You can actually make people aware of the injustices by not teaching social and emotional learning, and in turn, channel that for positive change. So point being is that maybe the goal isn't to be happy all the time. Maybe the goal is to have a greater balance of positive and negative emotions. and also strategies for managing the negative emotions more effectively. And the reason why I say that is because in my research, I see that people are not regulating very well. They're ignoring, they're avoiding, they're denying, they're suppressing, they're complaining, they're engaging in wishful thinking. I was doing a training for high schools recently, and I was just blown away by how poor role modeling there was. And I'll give you the example. I was starting the day with my mood meter, and I asked these educators, so what's your strategy for the day? And one person looked at me and he goes, well, I'm going to stare at the clock. I was like, okay. Anybody else have another strategy? Another one said, can I go put vodka in my coffee? And then I said, well, does anyone else have another strategy? And someone else said, I'm going to visualize my dog. And I said, all right, come on, another strategy? And someone else said, well, I just remove all my feelings and put them in a box before I walk into school. And then I had to call it out. I said, if these are the strategies that you are going to be using, then how the heck are you helping students manage their feelings when you have students who have parents who are going through a divorce, you have students with trauma in your classroom, you have students with learning differences? Like, what are you doing to support them in managing their feelings if those are your strategies? So very briefly, the goal of our center is to use the power of emotion to create a healthier and more equitable, innovative, and compassionate society. And what we've done is research, as well as looked at other people's research, on why emotions matter. And there are 5 reasons why I think all of us should care. None of them have to do with Marc Brackett's opinion. They all have to do with what the evidence base is for why emotions matter. The first is attention, memory, and learning. Think about it. Children learn what they care about. Right? Emotions are the drivers of our attention, which means that emotional engagement is in part a product of the relationship between the educator and students. I was a stressed out kid. I had abuse in my childhood. I had bullying in my childhood. I was unable to focus. And I knew I was smart. I knew I was capable, but my brain was in fight or flight mode, in survival mode, not in learning mode. People didn't recognize it. No one supported me with strategies, and hence I did poor academically. The second is decision making. How we feel drives our decisions, whether we're conscious of it or not. Think about it. We like to think we're rational creatures, but truth is our feelings oftentimes are influencing how we think, and in turn, the choices we make. Emotions are the driver of relationships. We say that emotions are signals to approach or avoid. Think about that. How you feel on the inside and how you read other people drives whether or not you want to move forward or you want to stay put or run away, actually. How many of you work with someone who displays a lot of negative emotions, weird facial expressions and body language and tone of voice? Right? It's a signal. I'm more powerful than you are. You're beneath me. That's what facial expressions and body language indicate or show to the world. Or I'm open. I'm supportive. I'm here to listen. Emotions of the driver are physical and mental health. Let's go back to that teacher study. The culture and climate of a school, the organizational structures and relationships are driving how teachers are feeling and literally influencing their physical and mental health. So think about that. How we feel, right, influences the fight or flight response, which activates cortisol, which activates other kinds of neurochemicals like our glycemic index, which in turn makes us crave fatty foods and sugars. So literally, the culture of our school activates our nervous system, creates emotion states, which then in turn influences our behavior, which influences our physical and health. Finally, performance and creativity. What I want to say here is that how we feel is the fuel for our creativity, but what we do with our feelings determines whether or not that creativity turns into an actual product. You don't have the strategies to manage the feedback and the unpleasant emotions associated with trying to achieve a creative goal. Guess what? Even the smartest among us doesn't achieve our dreams. And I see this all the time, even at a place like Yale where I teach. Some of the brightest crayons in the United States box just don't achieve their dreams because they can't deal with feedback. They can't deal with being imperfect. They can't deal with the frustration or the anxiety around what they're doing. They haven't been taught the strategies. So I'm going to ask all of you right now to take a moment and breathe, because I've been talking fast because I only got like 15 minutes left, which makes me anxious. How are you feeling? What are you thinking about? And now I'm going to jump into the next question, which is, really, honestly, how open are you to emotions? And in my new book, which is called Permission to Feel, I've discovered this idea that many of us are either emotion scientists or emotion judges. And as I've run around the world trying to get superintendents and principals and teachers and government officials to take social and emotional learning seriously, I found that there are people who are in their core or through their development have learned to be more open and curious and reflective, who see emotions as information. They don't judge emotions. They're in learner mode when they're working with people. They want to get specific and granular. And when things go wrong, they have a growth mindset. They say, you know what, I didn't regulate well today, but tomorrow's going to be a better day. And then I meet a lot of people, unfortunately, on my travels who say things like, my job is not to talk to my students about my feelings. I had a Yale professor literally say to me during a presentation something like this: what happened to Yale? And I was like, okay, tell me more, in my self-saboteur mode. And he said, this is Yale. We produce Nobel laureates, not nice people. Whoa. I'm glad I don't work with that person. Imagine what it's like to work for someone who has that mindset around feelings. Critical, closed. Emotions are noise. They know everything. Why are you so angry? I'm not angry, but maybe you're angry and you're projecting it on me. Someone who clumps, it's all good or bad, or has a fixed mindset. My father, bless his soul, he had a fixed mindset. He had really difficult anger problems, did not manage them well, and he'd say things like, son, get over it. This is who I am. I was like, well, that's another 10 years of therapy. But he just had that fixed mindset. He just believed that was who he was. There was no emotion education in his future. That was until his son got a doctorate and became his emotion coach. So ask yourself, are you an emotion scientist or are you an emotion judge? Take it a little further. Are you a scientist with some people and a judge with others? A lot of people tell me, well, I'm a scientist with my friends and with my students, but I'm a real judge with my significant others and my kids. Right? We have less patience for the people that we love the most. So then, as you know, social emotional learning is a framework. It's a process for building the castle of competence like self-awareness and social awareness and self-regulation, other regulation, and responsible decision-making. In our work, we use similar terms, except my particular focus is on the emotion system, and use the language of emotional intelligence to describe. So self-awareness, from our perspective, is getting at recognizing emotions in oneself and others. So being highly aware of my inner experience, being highly aware of other people's emotions, reading their facial expressions, their body language, their vocal tone, understanding where my feelings are coming from. Do I know why I'm angry? Do I know why I'm disappointed? What makes me overwhelmed versus what makes me anxious? What makes me feel elated? What makes me feel tranquil and calm and peaceful? Do I have the language to differentiate within emotions? So for example, if I'm angry, am I enraged? Am I livid? Am I angry? Am I peeved? Am I annoyed? Am I pleased? Am I happy? Am I elated? Am I ecstatic? Am I down, disappointed, everything hopeless, or despaired? Then the question is, what do I do with those feelings? And that's where expressing and regulating comes in. So take a moment and think about this. How comfortable are you expressing all of the mood meter quadrants? Are you comfortable sharing yellow emotions? Are you comfortable sharing the green? Interestingly enough, I'm not that comfortable being in the yellow. And I think, truthfully, it comes from my childhood of feeling quite a lot of shame that I didn't have a lot of yellow growing up. And I'm trying to have more yellow, but oftentimes I get uncomfortable being in the yellow, which is something I've been learning how to develop. My Yale students say that being in the green is a signal of being weak, that if they look like they're calm and content and tranquil, that people are going to think they're lazy, which is crazy. Are you comfortable being in the red and the blue? Or are those emotions that make you feel, out of control? Can you be sad and talk about it? Can you be overwhelmed and anxious and talk about it, or angry and talk about it in a helpful way? Same thing, my graduate students and other people even in our center say, well, I don't want to let Mark know that I'm anxious because then he's going to think I'm weak. When I think, tell me why you're feeling anxious and I can help support you and get you what you need to do your work better. But people have these mindsets around feelings which influence whether or not they're comfortable expressing their emotions. And then finally, how are you regulating? Honestly, when you're triggered at work, at home, what are your go-to strategies? Are they helpful? Are they unhelpful? How much systemic work is being done in your school around developing children's ability to manage the full range of emotions, the thought strategies, the action strategies, the prevention strategies? And when you start thinking about these underlying skills, we start realizing how much work we have to do. Here's what we know from research. Children with lower emotional intelligence look like the column on the left. Those with higher emotional intelligence look like the column on the right. So it seems like it's a pretty good thing to develop these skills in our youth. Among educators, we find very strong associations that educated with more developed emotional intelligence have these kinds of attributes and outcomes. Remember earlier I said that teachers are frustrated? I lied. They're mostly frustrated when they're in schools with a leader who is low in emotional intelligence. These are the results of a more recent study that we did. I mean, look at the difference in these wordles. Low emotional intelligence, high emotional intelligence. It's just startling to me that one variable, the skills of a leader, can shift the way a teacher feels on a daily basis in a school. No difference in workload. It's not like when you work in a school where the leader's higher in emotional intelligence, you don't do as much work. You work a little bit harder, actually. Frustration, 40% different. Think about that, 40% difference. Emotional exhaustion, 25 to 30% difference. That's a burnout factor. I want to leave the teaching profession, 30% difference. On the other hand, inspired, 50% difference. Job satisfaction, 25% higher. So when people say, do these skills matter among our leaders? Here are the data to say, definitely. If you're a leader, ask yourself, how skilled are you? If you're a teacher in a school, ask yourself, are the leaders in my school skilled in these areas? And now I'm going to ask you. So we're going to do poll number 3. On a scale from 1 to 5, 1, I am emotionally bankrupt. 5, I am like so emotionally skilled that, I'm a genius in emotional intelligence. Can we put up our poll, please?
There we go.
Let's see.
Answers are coming in quickly on this one. We'll give folks about 10 more seconds, but it looks like things are slowing down a little bit.
Oh boy.
All right.
95% of our population is above average. That's interesting data. Now here's the problem. Well, nobody wants to put a 5 because obviously, they don't want to show that they're narcissistic. But we got 47% say they're skilled, 43% say they're in the middle or above average. And here's the problem. My research shows that the correlation coefficient between my self-rated emotional intelligence and my actual emotional intelligence is next to 0. I'll repeat that. The correlation is next to 0. And why is that? Because The truth is, how much emotion education did we have? Right. I don't know about you, but I didn't grow up in a family where when I was walking down the stairs, my father would say, "Hey, son, I'm noticing a shift in your facial expression today. How you feeling? Are you upset? What's the word? Oh, son, I understand that you're feeling apprehensive. Let me give you a evidence-based strategy to help you regulate." Maybe some of you had that, but I know I didn't. So now we're going to go to our next poll, and I want honesty here. What was your emotion education like? Can we put that up, please? Be honest.
So that one I did not get, Mark. I apologize. So if folks just want to put answers
No.
in the chat box.
Let's just do this one in
Oh, no,
a.
actually, I apologize, Mark. I'm sorry. I saw it. There we go. We're launched.
This is how comprehensive was your own SEL education at home and school. What do you think? Come on, people. So it's interesting, right? Most people were skewed in the direction of being skilled in terms of emotional intelligence, but they don't get any SEL education. So that's a study to be done over the next couple of years. I didn't get any training in emotional intelligence, but I'm really skilled. These are just opportunities to reflect a little bit. Importantly, we want to differentiate our nature, meaning our personality traits, our temperament, which are inextricably linked to our nurturing, but they're slightly different, right? Your personality, your temperament is slightly different than, the actual formal knowledge that you got in your development. But obviously they both contribute to your skills. So in my little time left, I want to just share with you a little bit here around what I think is critically important. We have to recognize that SEL development is effortful. It is developmental. Learning the skills of emotion regulation, for example, are specific to the emotion and situation. My anger, I'm pretty good at dealing with it now. My overwhelm, I am awful at it. It's got to be personalized, meaning that what I need and what you need might be very different. In our schools, it has to be permitted and encouraged. And also the strategies that we learn have to be practiced, evaluated, and refined. And finally, I think the hardest thing for people is that there's no correct strategy. Unlike 5 minus 3 equals 2, how I deal with my emotional life and how you deal with your emotional life can be completely different, and both can be okay. I like hot yoga. Some people hate hot yoga. I like to walk in the park. Some people like to run. I like to say this thing to myself to help me calm down. You think that's weird. You like to say that thing to yourself to calm down. What we have to be are those emotion scientists that support our children in discovering for themselves what works best, which means that we have to be the role models, and we don't have to be the knowers. We have to be the helpers of children's self-discovery. There are some key strategies that I wanted to share. The work on mindfulness is helpful. Learning how to breathe properly and how to deactivate is critical. Sleep, nutrition, exercise, critical. Building and maintaining positive relationships, unbelievably important. Although only 1/3 of our nation's youth believe they have an adult in their school that they can go to if they had a personal problem. You got to do things that are meaningful to you. And lastly, I think the killer of many of us is our self-views. That we've got to work on monitoring our self-talk, and when it becomes overly negative and pessimistic, we've got to work on shifting it. And I ask you again, how much effort is there in our nation's schools to ensure that children's negative self-talk is evaluated and that it's replaced with more positive self-talk to support them in their healthy development? The last piece I want to do, and then we'll take a few minutes of questions, is I want to share with you the results of a study that was done recently, which are showing that these are not so soft skills. 30 to 40% of our jobs require quote unquote soft skills, and only 42% of our employers believe that new students are prepared for this. I'm excited. I just wrote a piece for Education Week that will come out very soon, basically saying that we need to get rid of the term soft skills. And the title is Social Emotional Learning, Not So Soft, because I want people to really take seriously that these are hard skills that get us through life. The last thing I want to share with you before we wrap up is just a little bit about the way our center does SEL. And my hope is that whether you're a school that uses Ruler or other evidence-based approaches, that you move away from thinking about it as a piecemeal model and go to a more systemic level. I think this theory of change is very helpful for people, meaning that what we've learned over the course of many years is that we have to move away from focusing just on the classroom approach, which is what I cared about for many of my years as a professional, because I hated school and I wanted to write a program for teachers to do with kids. But we failed horrifically in that process. And we failed because the adults who were implementing just didn't have the knowledge and skills they needed to do it well. Makes sense. They didn't have it in teacher prep or in their own education. So our strategy is adult personal professional learning, school-wide tools, providing online supports and coaching, and obviously you need to monitor and evaluate implementation. What we've learned is that it has to be about all the stakeholders, from the school board to the students. 4 aims, from enhancing our belief systems around SEL and emotions matter mindsets, to deepening our social emotional skills, to the setting level variables of building healthier climates in our schools and homes, to having SEL infused pedagogy practices and school-wide policies. And what we found is that when you have all 4 of those things operating simultaneously in a school, you get the best impact. So very briefly, there are certain tools that Ruler uses. One is we say there's too many rules and not enough feelings. So let's focus a little bit more on how people would like to feel in school. I'm actually just was on the Today Show. I'll be on tomorrow, Friday. And yesterday I got filmed. And it was exciting because I was talking about how do you build an emotional intelligence charter at home over the holidays? Because schools can do this, but so can homes do this. Like all of us want to feel a certain way in our homes. And there you go, family charter. Literally a family working together to talk about they want to feel playful, they want to feel confident, they want to feel loved. Well, what do we have to do to have those feelings? There's a high school charter. The mood meter, which you've all seen, is building that vocabulary, and we have more advanced ways of embedding a vocabulary. As a matter of fact, in our Feeling Words curriculum, we offer schools 12 emotion concepts per year, from preschool all the way up until middle school, to infuse into the existing curriculum through storytelling and creative writing, having students become the teachers of their parents, and then coming back to really think about how to regulate those feelings. It can also be helping teachers to learn how to use emotions wisely to do creative brainstorming, or to journal write, or to show empathy, or to engage in persuasive writing. You can see here just nicely creative ways of doing the work. We even built an app to help people plot themselves and monitor it over time. We have a tool we call the Meta Moment, which is helping us deal with our triggers. We found that people really struggle with healthy emotion regulation, and that one way to become more skilled at that is to activate your best self. And there are other tools here. So you can reach for your best self and strategize accordingly. A blueprint tool to help build perspective-taking skills and empathy. And what we found in the middle school and high school level is that it has to get more personalized. It's got to be more about my development. And in middle school, we focus more on project-based learning, where in high school, we focus more on helping students create a vision for their high school career. Like, what do I want out of my high school career? Where do I want to go? What do I need to get there? Lastly, I want to just say that we have found that it's a 3 to 5 year process for doing systemic work in schools. You got to do that readiness and planning. You got to focus on the adults. Then you get to do the work with students and families, and then you can be creative. But really, you got to go through that process slowly so that the adults who are going to be teaching have done the work on themselves first. So now that we've done this, I'm going to ask us to go back to our poll, and I've shared with you our vision for how to do work systemically. Can I ask everyone here to take a moment and just share? What do they think?
We'll give it just a few more seconds.
Okay. So it looks like we've got a lot of work to do. And I think that's why CASEL exists, right? Because we want to support schools in really thinking systemically about social and emotional learning. If only 1% of us think it's very comprehensive in our schools, or only 6% say it's pretty comprehensive, right? We've got work to do. And I know that our center is eager to support you, and I know that CASEL has built an entire organization, right, to help schools really think through how to create systemic change. So in summary, what I want to share with you is that what we found in our research is that schools that adopt these practices have students who are healthier and more academically prepared, teachers who are healthier and more satisfied in their jobs, classrooms where there are more positive climates and less bullying. I had the opportunity to build an SEL program for Yale University this year, or over the last couple of years, I should say, with my team. And what's funny is that there's so much resistance at the college level because students say things like, I didn't need emotional intelligence to get into Yale. And I say, well, you're going to need it to get out. I say it probably a little bit more compassionately than that. But point is that they come in just thinking that it's all about academic because that's all they've been prepared for. And they don't realize that they need these skills to have good relationships and to make informed decisions and to have purpose and passion in life. And I just wanted to share some quotes from students in terms of how they feel after they go through this. So when we can break through the barriers, when we can break through the resistance, I think beautiful things can happen for our nation's youth, and especially for the adults who are raising and teaching them. I've always believed that you have to kill people with the evidence, because then it's no longer about an opinion. It's about what the research shows is best for our nation's youth and the adults who are raising and teaching them. And in summary, what I like to say, putting this all together, is can we all just acknowledge that all emotions are information? There's no such thing as a bad feeling. Can we give ourselves and everyone we love, and even those who we don't love, the permission to experience and express all of their feelings? You know, as a child going through my traumatic experiences, I didn't have that permission. I suffered quite a bit as a young child, and I was threatened by my abuser not to share what was happening to me. And so you can imagine what happens when you are denied the permission to feel. Your feelings have to go somewhere. They go into negative thinking, they go into eating, they go into cutting, they go into really dark places. And I think we have to acknowledge the fact that it is a human right to give children the permission to have all their feelings and to have the environment where they can express them all, which means that we have to strive to become emotion scientists and not emotion judges. We've got to learn and refine the skills of emotional intelligence and social emotional learning more broadly. Appreciate that developing these skills is actually harder than some of the traditionally termed hard skills. Focus on systemic change and embrace its complexity. And what I want to end with is saying, you know, oftentimes people say to me something like, well, Mark, you made it. You know, look at what you've been able to do with your, you know, your life, even though you were abused, even though you were bullied, even though you had difficult childhood. And I say, you know, I'm fortunate. I had an uncle who was my savior. He was my hero in life. My parents, while they didn't know how to support me, they put me in therapy. I got involved in the martial arts and spent 30 years of my life training to have, you know, a mind that was focused and clear, and gave me confidence. I majored in psychology. I got a doctorate in psychology. I've been running around now for 30 years, you know, doing this work on social emotional learning, and I'm still struggling, and I still work hard. And so when people say that, I oftentimes think, but, you know, how many of our nation's youth who are living in poverty, how many of our nation's youth who are growing up in families that are micromanaging their development are going to have the same pathway? And so if we rely on our best hope for kids, we're denying them the permission to feel. So I'll end by saying, I believe that it is our moral obligation to create systemic change in our nation's schools, such that every child from preschool to high school gets an adequate education in SEL, which means that we, the adults who are raising and teaching kids, have to be those role models. And on that note, I just want to say thank you for showing up today. It's my honor and privilege to be the first webinar speaker. And I think maybe we have time for like 2 or 3 questions and then we can wrap up. Is that okay?
Yeah, I think that's fine. Folks, if you do need to jump off, we totally understand, but we'll go ahead and take a couple questions. And I'll say, Mark, the number 1 question that has come in is, what time is your show on, or your time on the Today Show tomorrow?
That's not a good question. Anyhow, I'm just kidding. It's tomorrow morning, I believe at 9 or 10 a.m., but don't worry, we'll be passing it out on social media. So I'll get the clip and share it. It's very
Okay.
short, but it is just a cute little piece on how to build a family emotional intelligence charter over the holidays. But on my website, if people go to my website, actually it was on Good Morning America a few weeks ago, and there was a nice piece on Christiana Amanpour's show, where it was a 20-minute interview that goes deeply into this work. So please visit the website to learn more.
Okay, great. And that URL is there on the screen for you to jot down, folks. And again, you will get a link to the recording and the slide deck. So look for that tomorrow. So some questions that came in, we'll get started. Could you speak to how using the words positive and negative emotions is different than clumping emotions as good and bad?
I love that question because it is a byproduct of the field. So just psychology has made these terms what they are, that we talk about happy and excitement and calm and content as being positive emotions, and we talk about anger and fear and disgust and despair as being negative emotions. And I think that we're not going to get away from that, but I think what we can do is shift the way we see positive and negative emotions, meaning that there's no such thing as a bad emotion. So negative emotions are not bad emotions. And more importantly than even that is that all emotions are information. I'm going to say it again. All emotions are information. Sometimes being in a high energy, pleasant mood, being ecstatic is not good because you're not focused. And other times perceiving an injustice like anger is a good thing. As a matter of fact, in the bullying world, empathy does not move people to helping people when they're being bullied. Anger motivates people because you have to see what is happening as an injustice to then create action. So I just think that we have to acknowledge that there are negative emotions. It doesn't feel great to be angry. It doesn't feel great to be lonely and sad, but it's not a bad thing. And I'll stop there.
Alrighty. I think that was helpful and something for us all to ponder on a little bit. So what's your view on how effective emotional release is versus emotional regulation to become more skilled in emotional intelligence? How important is it to first release the emotion, no matter how ugly or messy or inconvenient that might be?
Well, you can think of that as a form of emotion regulation, right? So social support is one way of releasing it by sharing it, or journaling is another way of releasing it, but more privately. And it all depends on the context. It depends on what the emotion is. So sometimes it's, you have to express with the right person at the right time. And maybe that's sufficient. Other times, you talk through the problem and then you realize that you need to work on yourself. Like really need to work on your self-talk to have a longer term positive gain, in terms of your mental health. But that's my short version of that. I write a lot about that in my book, though. So if whoever asked that question, there's a whole chapter on expression and its complexities, but also its benefits.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think we're all, if we haven't already read your book that's there up on the screen, I'm sure many of us are going to want to dive into it. And unfortunately, we'll make this our last question. We had lots of wonderful questions come in, and thanks so much, everyone, for asking them. And we're sorry we can't get to them all. I think we could probably take questions for another hour or two. But here's our last one.
Some of, like, when you send them to me, I'm happy to think about them, and even we can put them out with the webinar if it's at all possible.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great suggestion. I'm happy to do that. Alrighty. So, and this is a big question, but you can give a 30-second soundbite answer. What are some suggestions for teachers or other staff to tackle the challenge of a school leader that has low emotional intelligence?
Talk to the superintendent and get him fired. No, kidding. That was a joke. I think this is part of the problem in our nation period, is that we are so afraid of talking to people who may not have these skills because we're afraid of how they're going to react and respond to the skills. So my recommendation is that we use the principles of social emotional learning and emotional intelligence to craft the way we communicate, meaning that we think through what is the objective, like verifiable feedback that we can provide someone. When we're in faculty meetings, what I've noticed is the following, or when you observe me and give me feedback, here's how I feel, or just the basic, what I'm getting at there is that you're not sharing your opinion, you're trying to use, the verifiable aspects of someone's behavior as a way to give them feedback. And then the way to give feedback, right? There is a way to give emotionally intelligent feedback, which is never to blame, never to, tell someone, but to just share, like I just said, what you notice and potentially share how it makes you feel. And then also potentially share what you'd like to see are ways that might enhance the way that communication occurs, in that school setting. I have found that when I've gotten feedback in the past, and now, and I'm not I'm a difficult leader myself because I'm very, I'm running around, I'm not present a lot. People have given me that feedback, and if people say, "Well, Mark, you're never around," right? That's activating, right? That triggers me, and I'm like, "Well, who's raising the money?" And blah, 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 it makes me go for the jugular. Whereas when someone approaches me or I approach someone through the lens of my best self, right? It's like, oh, Mark, I really would appreciate if you were around more, or that when you're in meetings with me, this would happen. It changes the whole dynamic. So that's my basic advice. And then I would also just hope that your school, when it adopts whatever approach it does for social and emotional learning, really ensures that it's a whole school model, meaning that the principal is not sending people to training, but yet joining in that process. And for our work, we have found that we must include the principals in our training. We don't actually let schools come to the training unless the principal joins. So that way, everyone's on the same page, and everyone is building the same language, and everyone understands the principles. And on that note, I just want to say again, thank you everybody for spending an hour and 10 or so minutes with me and the Castle team. Excited to see all of you, hopefully at next year's SEL Exchange conference. And until then, take a nice long inhale and an exhale, and wishing you the best of luck on building a more comprehensive approach to SEL in your school and district. And thank you.
Thank you, Mark. This has certainly been a valuable hour and 10 minutes for me, and is setting me off on a good path for the rest of my day. And I hope it does for everyone else in our audience. And thanks everyone for joining us and staying on a little longer. I think that was worth everybody's time. Just a final reminder that you will get an email tomorrow with a link to access the slide deck and the recording. Sometimes those emails do end up in junk or spam folders. So if you don't get it by tomorrow afternoon, take a look in those folders, and you probably will find it there if it's not in your inbox. And one last request: when you log off today, a quick survey will pop up. If you would take just a minute to answer those questions, we'd really appreciate it. It helps us to continue to improve our webinars and also bring you topics and speakers that will be of the most interest and use to you. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us. And thanks so much, Mark, for sharing all of this information. And again, for giving us lots to think about. Have a great day, everyone.
All right. Bye-bye now.